Ben. Welcome everybody to week 2 of the Spain and Portugal tour. It's great for me to be back and great to see some familiar faces. As always, I'll quickly introduce the team at United Cellars before our guest experts. Firstly, we have Alistair Cooper, Master of Wine. Alistair is calling in from the UK. He writes for Jancis Robinson and Decanter, and is also our expert in all things European wines as well. So welcome, Alistair.
Hi, thanks, Luke. Good to see everyone again, and yeah, looking forward to this week 2 of our Iberian extravaganza.
Fantastic. As always, we've got the insights and expertise of our head wine buyer, Mark Faber. Welcome, Mark.
Bienvenido. Welcome, everyone.
And Jane Moore, our events manager. So welcome, Jane.
Good evening, everyone. Very happy to have Luke back.
Well, I'm happy to be back. So I'm Luke, if you haven't met me before, one of the wine brokers here. So with regards to our 2 guests, those who attended week 2 would be familiar with Clara from Bibendum. Welcome, Clara. Oh,
you're on mute there, Clara.
There we go.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Tom Poyabert from, well, the head winemaker at Bodega Exopto. As a short introduction, Tom is a Bordeaux expat, similarly to last week, actually, and is one of the so-called Riocan rollers, a new wave of vintners bringing quite an exciting new energy to the region's wines. So we're all really excited to get your insights this evening, Tom.
Hello, everybody. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, yeah. Welcome. We'll be looking at your wine.
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, no problem at all. We'll be looking at your wine after the CAVA, so excited to do that. Now, for those who weren't here last week, I'll just cover off the wheel of wine. Regulars to the tasting would be very familiar with this and probably falling asleep by now with me explaining it. But basically, between each wine, we're going to do a quick quiz question. All we need you to do is text in with your name, your email, and the answer, 1, 2, 3, or 4, to the number on the screen there. Basically, if you enter with the correct answer, you get 3 points. If you enter with the incorrect answer, you get 1. And then we'll draw the wheel at the end of the evening. Now, the winner this evening will get a $50 United Cellars wine credit, but also because we're doing the 4-week tour, there's a bit of a mystery prize at the end. And we have a little leaderboard from last week with the VUELTA de España theme. So well done to those guys who got the full 6 points available. There's a few of you there, so congratulations. But obviously we've got 3 more weeks to play, so it's all to play for. So good luck with that. And then just finally, we want these to be as interactive and as fun and engaging as possible. So feel free to unmute at any time. We've obviously got the chat box there. If you want to give us your tasting notes via the chat box, we'd love to see them. And we can get them put forward to the experts. But without further ado, we're going to head over to just south of Barcelona and start looking at the CAVA with Ali.
Great. I think before, if it's okay with you, Luke, I'm going to do just a brief introduction to kind of the regions that we're going to be looking at tonight. Not too much, because I don't want to steal Clara and Tom's thunder, but just give a little background to those regions before we look at the CAVA. So obviously last week we looked at green Spain and Galicia, then the hot inland arid areas of Castilla y Leon. And today we're going to be looking at Spain's national fizz, CAVA, probably, arguably, well, not arguably, its most famous wine region of Rioja, and then heading over to the ultra trendy and very revered area of Priorat. Unfortunately, very annoyingly, I don't have the wines. They were supposed to arrive from Spain, and apparently they're not arriving for the next 2 days. So I haven't got the wines, but I can report, if you remember, I didn't have the La Dehesa La Granca last week. It did come, the 2009, and it was beautiful. I agree with all the comments that everyone said. I think it was Peter or someone was saying how they loved the chocolatey sort of tobacco-y character. So I can report back that was delicious. But I do have a CAVA here. but not the same one as you. So Mark's going to tell us a little bit about that. But a bit of background. So just a few words on Rioja. It's Spain's fine wine capital, you know, a region characterized by rich tradition as well as vibrant innovation. You know, there's a wealth of historic producers, many of whom have been making wine for centuries. But recently, the region has seen the arrival of a new wave of modern, ultra-modernists. And I think Tom probably would be one of those. So I look forward to hearing all about that. So as a result, Rioja has a wonderful variety of styles. The geography of the area is a contributing factor. It's 75 miles from northwest to southeast. This results in a diverse kind of range of styles and quality as well. So Tempranillo is the most important grape at the heart of Rioja. It makes fruity light wines, has a great affinity with oak. And then we have Graciano, and I believe this is one of Tom's speciality, a grape that I absolutely love myself. So I look forward to hearing about that. And then the other grape variety that is used there is Masuelo or Carignan, which you'll know it as. So there's different styles, as we've talked about, traditional producers like Lopez de Heredia, La Rioja Alta, using American oak. Then you get the modern classical, I'd probably call them, younger, rounder wines that retain the delicious character of Rioja through cask aging, with the structure to develop in bottles. So Muga, Cune, Contino, you know, these are all producers that could fall into that. And then we've got the modern style. I won't say about those. I look forward to hearing about that with Tom. So a little bit about Priorat, just a few words. So we talked about last week the revolution in Spain that happens from kind of the 1980s, and none more so, you know, has shown this than Priorat. It really leapt forward in the sort of 1980s. Here you have steep terraces that grow up, you know, go up to about 700 meters above sea level. And we've got continental climate, so schisty terroir. I'm sure Clara's going to tell us all about their famous Licorella soils when we get there, because that's a really important part of Priorat. So let's get on to Cava. So hopefully you've all poured your Cava. I'm going to give you a bit of a background onto how Cava is made and what makes Cava Cava. So Cava is actually quite a unique DO in Spain because it actually covers vineyards in 5 regions of Spain. So it's not a geographical designation as such. So Cava can be made in Catalonia, it can be made in Aragon, it can be made in Navarra, it can be made in Rioja, and it can be made in the Basque country. But the reality is that 95% of Cava is made in Catalonia and 90% around the village of Penedès to the southwest of Barcelona. So here the grapes grow on limestone soils, altitudes between 200 and 500 meters. There are some slightly higher, but it's a climate that's slightly cooler because of the altitude than at the coast where it's very, very warm indeed. So Cava's quite unique when we look at sparkling wines in that if you think of the great sparkling wines of the world, you know, Champagne, England, I'm going to say England because I think they're up there, and you know, let's say Tasmania as well. They're made in cool areas, and if you look at, you know, Cava, essentially it's made in a Mediterranean climate around Barcelona, so it's a lot warmer. So what does that mean? It means that typically they don't have to add what you call a dosage, which is basically sugar, at the end of fermentation when you bottle the wines. And I'll talk about the process in a second. So you tend to get more richness in Cava at a younger age, if that makes any sense. So you don't need to add sugar. So they are richer because essentially the grapes are riper. So the grapes used in Cava are Macabeo, which is called Viura in Rioja, and that's the primary grape. And despite its importance, it's actually quite a simple grape variety. It's quite floral, a little bit lemony, but basically quite simple. Then you get Xarel·lo, which is quite an odd, it's spelled Xarel-lo. It's quite a strange one, but it's a Catalan name. And this is more fragrant, more aromatic. It's got florality, it's got these kind of pear melon characters and slightly waxy. And the last grape is called Parellada. And Parellada is arguably the most prized grape variety, but not used in quite as much of the blend. So a typical blend would be 50% Macabeo, 30% Xarel·lo, and 20% Parellada, something like that. So it might seem obvious to compare Cava to Prosecco, but actually Cava, they're quite different. Cava is produced in the same method as Champagne or Franciacorta or these traditional method sparkling wines. So I'm going to talk the difference between sort of Prosecco and Cava production. So just all sparkling wines start off with a base wine, with a base still wine that's quite neutral and low in alcohol. So essentially what happens with the second fermentation is it goes up by about 1 to 2% in alcohol. So we're looking around 10 to 11% still wines. After this point though, these still wines, the two methods diverge quite dramatically. So tank fermentation involves putting your still liquid into a tank and then adding your yeast and sugar. There are various other ways of doing it, but this is the Prosecco method. And then the carbon dioxide can't escape. It dissolves into the wine, and then they bottle it under pressure to maintain those the bubbles. Whereas secondary fermentation in bottle is quite different. So the wine is put into bottle, yeast and sugar is then added into the bottle, and as a result, the alcohol content goes up and the carbon dioxide dissolves into the wine. After fermentation, the wine is aged in bottle, and the process called autolysis happened. And this can take a very long time, from months to years. And this gives the biscuity, bready, rich, brioche character that you get from secondary fermentation in bottle. We'll get to the wine in a second. I know this is going on quite a lot, but it's quite an interesting process. So in Cava, the big difference between Cava and Champagne is the aging requirements. In Cava, this Cava that I've got and the one that you've got has to have a minimum of 9 months aging on its lees. And then I think a Reserva is 18 months and a Grand Reserva is 30 months. And the longer you leave it in contact with the lees, the richer it gets, the more autolysis it has, those sort of nutty brioche characters. Champagne is different. It has to have at least 12 months and then 30 months for vintage. So it's different aging requirements. So after the aging, then they have to get that dead yeast out. So this is something called disgorgement. Essentially, they freeze, they turn the bottle upside down, freeze the top of the bottle, and out pops the dead yeast that's sitting at the top. So then we have the dosage, which I talked about earlier. The bottle is normally topped up because they get rid of a bit of liquid. Bottle is normally topped up with a mixture of wine and sugar, which determines the sweetness of the wine. But here in Cava, as I said, they don't normally need to add anything because the grapes are riper and richer already. So they don't need to have as much time on their dead, they don't need to have as much sugar put in at the end, sorry. Wow, that was quite a long process that I've just explained to you. So I know it was a lot to take in, that's why I was talking quite quickly. But that essentially is Cava. And as I said, I don't have the wine, I'm going to hand over to Mark for the wine that you guys have got. But typically I would say, and I'll talk about, this wine here, the characters I tend to find from Cava is a waxy, kind of citrusy, waxy character, which I really like, and I actually think Cava should be taken more seriously. Gone are the days where they were inexpensive. Grand Reserva Cavas can be very, very good. For me, they're far superior to Prosecco, and the general quality of Cava has gone up immensely over the years. So for me, you get fine bubbles, you get this waxy, lemony character, which for me comes a lot from the Xarel·lo. But Mark, over to you to talk about this particular wine. Whew.
Thank you, Ali. That's a great introduction to the region itself. Just to get a little bit more specific on the wine that you guys are tasting tonight, this is a blend of the 3 grape varieties that Ali was saying. It's a bit more of an even blend, so it's 35% Macabeo, 25% Xarel·lo, and 40% Parellada. So I definitely get a lot of that real apple-y note, which I get from a higher percentage of Parellada in this. Yeah. And it's got a really kind of like mineral crystalline line to it as well. There's a little bit of stone fruit, but it's really about citrus for me. Just a bit more technicality on this. So as Ali said, there's not a lot of dosage added to this. It's only 7 grams per litre. So Brut kind of runs from around 5. So 7 grams is basically almost totally dry. So they really don't need to add very much sugar to these. It's had 19 months on lees, which is actually a pretty considerable amount of time for Cava. And one thing I've got to point out that Danny's commented on, love a Cava, they're great value. Part of the reason for that exceptional value is actually part of the technology that I know these guys utilize within their vineyards, within the winemaking process, I should say. Great view here you've got of these old vineyards that they use Ali, again, specifically with this producer, they are within the very, very center of Penedès, the most respected region of CAVA, and you can see these ancient vines that they've got there, which is quite amazing. The sandy soils as well. But anyway, the part of the reason why, getting back to the point, part of the reason why they can push out wines that are of this level of quality at this price point, at this approachable price point, when you compare it to Franciacorta in Italy, or you compare it to, of course, Champagne. But I would even compare it to some top-end Tasmanian sparklings, which can really get up there in price. These guys are able to do it for a fraction of the price because of a very interesting procedure they use, which utilizes the thing called a gyro pallet. So many of you would probably know the romantic image of a person in the cellar turning the bottles and making sure that the yeast and lees go down to the edge so they can be removed from the bottle before it gets sealed and sold. But these in CAVA, they widely utilize a thing called a gyro pallet, which is basically an enormous steel pallet that all the bottles are loaded into, and it's mechanically worked out the way to turn and move the bottles in a direction that get it perfectly set so that all of the yeast comes out and gets to the very, very base, and it's really, really easily removed. And it is an absolute fraction of the price and a fraction of the time that it takes to do it in the caves of Champagne. So they can do it for a real fraction of the price. So it's quite a unique. I know I was in Tassie a few weeks ago and I saw Stefano Lubiana, who make a great sparkling wine down there. They're now utilizing gyro pallets just to keep the costs down a little bit and make it a bit more of an attractive product whilst not sacrificing on the quality. So yeah, a few little interesting things on that. 7 grams residual sugar, 19 months on lees, a kind of a nice even mix of the grape varieties. Single vineyard from Vila Franca de Penedès in the center of Penedès. So yeah.
Mark, I'm keen to open the floor up a little bit and get some opinions from our guests and also our experts. Tom, I'd like to get your opinion on this. Obviously, knowing that you're a Frenchman but have lived in Spain now for 20 years. Are you more of a Champagne man, a Cava man? What are your thoughts?
This is a very tricky question for a French guy. What can I say? I think we don't have to compare both products, because climates are totally different, terroir regions are totally different. The only common things they have are bubbles. So I don't like to compare Cava to Champagne, because the varieties are so different. I like both. I mean, you can get great quality of Cava, great quality of Champagne, but I think they're opposite. I see more tension, more freshness, more acidity on Champagne. I see more Mediterranean character, maybe more slight oxidation in a good sense of a word, more texture, more volume on Cava. So they're totally different, but there are a few great producers of Cava that I'm having at home, So I wouldn't like to compare them, they are very different.
Interesting.
Very well said. Very down the middle of the line.
Yeah, very pragmatic. Danny's come into the chat and said, I rarely have had a bad Cava. Such an easy go-to sparkling. Danny, you haven't tried the Sainsbury's basic Cava that I used to buy at university.
I was just about to say you've not bought Cava in the UK then, Danny, because there is a dangerous amount of pretty rubbish Cava in the UK that I unfortunately found out the hard way.
there is, but you know what? I'm going to say, so I've got Waitrose #1, no Sainsbury's for me, and so this is Waitrose #1. This has had 12 months on lees, and this is actually, I think I paid £10 for this. It's exceptionally good, And the thing that we talked about, you can get richness much more simply in Cava versus Champagne, a different type of richness. This is exceptionally good. So it's not your cheap Sainsbury's. This is a good old Waitrose #1, Luke.
So to put it out there, would you say that, I mean, obviously the allure of champagne is there. Is there a bit of marketing appeal then if the wines are pretty similarly made? And obviously the terroir is different, but this is so much less expensive than even an entry-level champagne.
I think it's difficult because CAVA actually, as you've just sort of attested to, and Mark has said, the reputation is not there with CAVA, you know, because there was a load of dross. Let's be, as you said. I think it's improved dramatically in the past, you know, decade, 15 years. There's been all sorts of rules going on. There's actually a massive shake-up happening with the DO rules coming up. You know, I read about it yesterday. You know, so there's going to be all sorts of changes to make it more geographical. I think it's fighting against its historic reputation, but you know, I'd far this at £10 versus a prosecco at £10 over here. There's no, you know, I'll drink a spritz, you know, Campari spritz with prosecco, but this I'd drink, you know, happily on its own. So I think it's just a reputation thing that it's fighting against.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, and you've mentioned it a few times, and I definitely agree. For a dollar for dollar, when you're fighting dollar for dollar, prosecco versus Cava, I think I know which way I'm going. You know, 9 times out of 10. Yeah. There's
no thing. But what Tom said is absolutely true. It's kind of comparing Cava to champagne is a bit like apples and pears because they're completely different grape varieties. They are different styles. It doesn't have the tension, the acidity of champagne, but I think it offers it's a really good alternative. As Danny said, you know, he's rarely had a bad one. He's quite lucky not to have had a bad one, but you know that they are just really good value. They are very good value wines.
Amazing. So I think that's a nice way of moving into quiz question number 1. So get your phones out and feel free to text in. So the question is, Mount Tidi is Spain's tallest mountain, but what makes it unique? Is it answer 1, it's man-made? Is it answer 2, it is only 100 years old? Or is it answer 3, it's not actually located in the mainland of Spain? So just remember 1, 2, or 3, rather than the full answer there.
Okay.
I think, I mean, it's I would say this is a pretty easy one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, Fred, please.
I was going to ask Ali about the very big producers. I remember being very disappointed when we fronted up to Freycinet to find there was a railway wagons being loaded full of Freycinet, and it was more like a factory than a winery. Yeah. But having drunk it was sort of okay. And
yeah, it's industrial scale. You're right, Fred.
But my fondest memories of Penedès was stopping for a late lunch in a little village, a little cafe, and wanted some wine, and they had a rosé cava that was made by a family, and it had the picture of the husband and wife on the top of the bottle on the cap.
Okay, that's quite funky. I don't know who that is, but yeah, you're right. Freixenet and Codogna, the 2 big players. It's pretty. It's big production stuff. I don't know the quantities, but it's huge. But you know, so is Moet Chandon, those guys as well, pretty industrial. But they're not bad wines, Freixenet and Codogna. Some of their single vineyard type things that are good. But you know, producers like Gramona are the ones you want to look for as well. But they've stepped out of the DO. It's quite complex. It's really in flux, the whole DO of Cava at the moment. But no, their quality is good for the big boys, I think.
I think also I used to sell absolute like pallets and pallets of Codogna in when I lived and worked in the UK many years ago. And one thing that I will make the comment on is that their base level standard was really quite high, especially for when you compare dollar for dollar with other products, as we've said. But those producers had the opportunity, because they created such a large volume, their single site and their more premium wines were genuinely absolutely outstanding. They were really, really, really good. And it was where the winemakers were really able to kind of, you know, flex their muscles and try some really, really cool stuff. And they were cracking wines.
Yeah, they're good.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to move on. I've just pulled up an Earth view of Mount Tidi. I think most people will get 3 points here. I'm going to zoom out, so we'll reveal the answer. It's, of course, based in Tenerife. So well done if you got answer number 3. Well done, that's 3 points into the Wheel of Wine. So we're going to have a look at wine number 2, which is, of course, the Bodega Ex Opto. And I'm going to hand over to you, Tom.
Thank you. So once again, thank you for your invitation. It's a good transition talking about Cava Champagne and then talking about Rioja, because for those of you who don't really know, who are not familiar with Rioja, it could be easily compared to Champagne in the structure. I mean, not in the wines and the style, but the structure of the industry. You know, in Rioja, as Ali said in his introduction, there are very big brands, very historical brands like the Marqués de Riscal, like Bodegas Bilbaínas, like Cune, but López de Heredia, that have been making wines for decades or centuries, but exported wine and made Rioja famous. Just a bit like the big champagne brands like Moet, like Dirt, etc. But then this last, I would say, 10, 15 years, just like in Champagne, we've seen a new wave of independent growers with much smaller structure. We are talking about less than 100,000 bottles produced. Meanwhile, these big guys produce millions of bottles. So we are now in a moment where we share different styles of wine. The very classical Crianza Reserva, Grand Reserva wines, Tempranillo-driven, Americano on the side, and a new wave of growers, vigneron, whatever you would like to call them, which I think I'm part of, where we are more focused on, I would say, terroir expression, vineyard management, viticulture, more than industrial way to make wine. So I personally started the project 20 years ago now, a little less than 20 years ago. And that was my idea, not to go on a very traditional style, but go on more fruity, expressive, fresh wines. To quickly describe the appellation, Rioja, it's a very big appellation, okay? It's 100 kilometers long by maybe 30, 40 kilometers wide. And if you'd like to remember something, it's a valley stuck between two mountain chains, Sierra Cantabria on the north and Sierra de la Demanda on the south. And in the middle, a river, the Ebro River. Okay, so that's the global sketch of Rioja. Two mountain chains, a river in the middle, and a lot of different climates, a lot of different structure, a lot of different terroirs. Being the southern part of Rioja more Mediterranean with soils of river rocks, sands, some clay too. The left bank of the northern part is more limestone and clay, and the right bank, sorry, where you can see here Nájera, this is more clay with irons, very red soils. So this is the global sketch of Rioja. Two mountain chains, the river, Mediterranean style, limestone clay, and on the other sides, iron and clay. Okay, so it's a very exciting place for a winemaker because you have plenty of terroir, you have plenty of opportunity to work with. You have plenty of different regions. I decided to focus, when I set the winery, I decided to focus on the northern part of the appellation, between two villages called Abalos and San Vicente de la Sonsierra, with very old vines of Tempranillo mainly, with some Jura, all in bush style, goblet vines. Okay, and this is where we work on 12 hectares of vineyards, okay? But then when the winery evolves, when I wanted to increase production, I felt very attracted by the the opposite spot of Sonsierra, which would be the Rioja Oriental, villages like Alfaro, Aldea Nueva, which is actually, or used to be, Garnacha, Grenache Kingdom. Okay, so the wine we are going to taste today is a tribute to Garnacha, which is certainly one of the historical, or was one of the historical grapes of Rioja, but totally disappeared in the 60s and the 70s. Now, Garnacha represents only 8 to 10% of the total vineyard. Okay, but it used to be in the 40s and the 50s, it used to be half of it. So all the old Rioja you might have a chance to taste always has a big amount of Grenache, which confers low pH, good acidity, and that's why so many old Riojas are still in a very good shape and very nice to taste because of this Garnacha apportation. In the 60s and 70s, the 80s, when the sales developed a lot in Rioja, when the production increased, most of the culturists ripped off the Grenache and planted Tempranillo that was more profitable, better production, better yields, less work in vineyard. So it's a bit of a shame. And then another comparison with Champagne, you know, Rioja is 60,000 hectares of vines, which means a global production mainly of 300 million bottles a year that are produced by only 600 wineries. So wineries in general are very big. You know, the average production of a winery in Rioja is from 700 to 800,000 bottles. I'm producing 100,000, so very, very small. Okay. On the other hand, if we look at the viticulturists, 60,000 hectares of vineyard, but 15 to 16,000 viticulturists. So a lot of very small vineyards inherited from generation to generation, and people are then producing very small amounts of grapes, but they don't earn their life with grapes, which is the same. So they sell to big producers, to big wineries, and look for facility. That's why Tempranillo replaced Garnacha in most of cases. Okay, so with Bofeto, the wine you have in front of you, I wanted to go back to a traditional blend of the 50s or the 60s with 60% Grenache, 40% Tempranillo, and 10% Graciano, okay? Which is interesting as well, is that in this wine, this is a generical Rioja, I would say, as we purchase and we source grapes from all Rioja, okay? Mainly 50% from the south, the Grenache part, and Graciano, which bring fruit, juiciness, juicy character, but we balance it with some grapes from the north, from Avalos, which is a Tempranillo and a little bit of Grenache also, which will bring more acidity, more tension, more freshness, you know. Luc told I was coming from Bordeaux, so I'd always been working with this blending mentality, trying to bring together different elements to get to a nice balance. And I thought that the southern grapes were maybe too jammy, too ripe. And on the other hand, I like to balance with a fresh acid Tempranillo from the north. Okay, so that's the global description of this wine. In terms of winemaking, what we wanted there is to enhance the Grenache character. Okay, so no oak interaction. There's no new oak in that. All the grapes are fermented, would it be in stainless steel or concrete tanks at very low temperature, very short fermentation. Okay, it's not a carbonic maceration like most of entry-level wines in Rioja. We distain the grapes, but we don't crush them. So it's midway between a carbonic maceration and a classical fermentation. Okay, so very low temperature, very short fermentation, 1 week to 10 days, and then the wine is aged in concrete tanks, oak food or big oak tanks, but old ones. You know, we don't want new oak. We don't want tannin. We want the wine to be very, very fresh, very fruity, very easy drinking in the good sense of the word.
Tom, I'm really interested just to jump in on that, and we'll open up the floor in a second and get people's tasting notes. But obviously, one thing that you kind of taught fairly early on when you're learning about Rioja is the oak aging and how that kind of designates wines into Reserva, Gran Reserva, Crianza. Is that something that you wanted to avoid intentionally, or you just felt the wine didn't necessarily need the oak aging that some of the traditional kind of producers have?
Yes, I when I realized all this was working, I didn't see any interest in it, you know, because it's just about numbers. just about numbers. To be able to label your wine with a Crianza, Reserva, or Gran Reserva back label, you just have to have the wine a certain amount of time in barrels and bottles. There's no quality control, just like numbers. You can put your worst wine in a barrel for 2 years and then 3 years in bottle, and you'll get the Gran Reserva label, which is supposed to be the top quality, or at least the most expensive wine in Rioja. So it didn't make much sense to me. Besides that, there are a lot of, you have to justify every day of a year 33,000 liters of wine in stock. So when I started, and like most of small wineries don't have this amount of stock in wine, so you're not allowed to apply to the Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva system. So I didn't feel very attracted by that. I prefer to apply a French or Italian model, just making what I think is good, making different style of wine. Of course, some of my wines go into barrels, like a recent Exopto, but I didn't want to just to make wine on an Excel sheet. Just
Excellent.
like.
Yeah. I'm interested to get our guests' thoughts on this wine, if you don't mind, Tom. I'm going to open up the floor firstly to the Colmers and the Colmer crew we've got. It looks like a nice dinner party there. Stephen, nice to see you again. What are your thoughts on this one?
I'm addicted to Rioja. And I love it. I love the Tempranillo Grenache Graziano blend. I think it's a great blend. I think the three really belong together. I know there's a lot of Rioja, which is 100% Tempranillo, but gee whiz, I always think the other two add so much more complexity to it. I think it gives it fruit, it gives it balance. I'm really impressed with this wine. I think it's a wonderful wine. And I love your question, Luke, about the grading or the lack of grading. So thank you very much. Great choice. Thanks for choosing it.
Well, that's you can thank Mark and Jane for that. They're the wine pickers.
If I could just put my 2 cents in here, it's been what we really ultimately wanted to do with this is show everyone at this tasting some of the classics, obviously. So obviously you've seen a Cava that was a fairly classic Cava, but then try some things that you might not expect from Spain. And we saw that last week with the Godello. That was we from the orders. I can tell that a few of you definitely liked it. So it's great to see wines like this. And thank you for your feedback, Stephen. I'm glad you enjoyed it. To me, this really does it. For me, if I'm looking at Rioja, the first thing that I'm looking for is oak, obviously, and Luke's question was bang on. There's no oak in that at all, as Tom just said, and it's just interesting to see to allow the grape varieties to kind of stand on their own, so you can see what they're doing. And to me, this is almost like a GSM. It's allowing each of the pieces to kind of support each other and bring their own little thing to the mix. So this is just such a lovely wine, such a beautiful, crunchy, enjoyable wine.
I love your reference to GSM because I think these three grapes belong together.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys as well. And as you might have seen in the chat, my wine arrived. Literally, I just went, the door went and my wine arrived. I've now got the wine, I've opened it and I've tasted it. Amazing.
Perfect timing.
Rioja, I'm with Stephen, obviously with Tom. I think Rioja is such an exciting region, and there are, as we talked about, the difference between the traditional styles and the more modern styles. And I really, I love the GSM. That's a really great comparison as well. And this is wonderful, Tom. It's super fresh and crunchy, but there's texture in there as well. There's deep fruit character. This is a side of Rioja I'd love to see more of over here. It's still confusing if you go and buy Rioja from the shops over here. It's normally sort of Campo Viejo is the big brand over here, and that will be, they're pretty good quality, but they're far more that traditional style. But it can be confusing, I think, for consumers. Don't know exactly what they're going to get from Rioja, but I think that makes it all the more exciting. But I think no, this is absolutely delicious. And I, again, the grape varieties as well. Stevens, they said it. They go so well together. I'm a big fan of Graciano, of its kind of balsamic character, almost minty, but searing acidity that it can give as well. So I think they're wonderful grape varieties when put together, and a great wine.
Fantastic. And I think the Google Earth presentation really showed, Tom, the diversity, as you alluded to, that and being a Bordelaise man, kind of used the right bank and left bank analogy in terms of soil types and terroir, and how that expresses, Garnacha and Tempranillo so differently. I'm curious, Clara, we haven't heard from you yet. Obviously, you're responsible for importing this wine. What are your thoughts? What are your insights on this one?
Well, look, I think the Bozzetto from Tom is probably one of the Spanish wines in our portfolio that we've really had
I love that.
some of the most fantastic success with. It's been a real joy to bring it to Australia and put it in people's glasses, because what we found is that it's a wine that is pretty universally loved across. It's not very often in our industry where we get a wine that's really loved by retail consumers and by restaurants and by fine dining, as well as by wine bars and pubs. And this is a wine that really, really has that kind of breadth of appeal. And I think a lot of that comes down to all the things you've touched on, over the last few minutes, but primarily that kind of expression of fruit and place without being weighed down by lots of winemaking and lots of alcohol is something that people really enjoy. But I think also just the quality of the vineyards and the quality of what Tom's doing, and the fact that it's, a relatively small production in the grand scheme of things, well, a very small production in the grand scheme of things. There's a real authenticity to it, and it's not, whilst it is, like a lot of people have pointed out, exceptionally easy to drink, it also is really interesting to drink, and there's a savory edge and a lot of complexity there that keeps you going back to the glass. It's not just something you drink a glass of and then move on from. They're really beautiful wines. And I think particularly in the Australian climate, I think we can really relate to them. We have a great history of Grenache here, and we have a great number of Grenache on the market. But I think because of that, people are really open to the style, and being at that kind of more medium-bodied end of the spectrum, it suits the way we eat, it suits the way we drink, it suits the lifestyle here. So yeah, it's a real joy to sell, actually.
Excellent.
Yeah, indeed it is.
We got Fred, who unmuted there. I wasn't sure if you
Yeah,
unmuted.
I have unmuted. I was just saying we're all enjoying it. I wouldn't normally drink a 2-year-old red, but it's beautiful. It doesn't taste coarse at all. I think it could almost be chilled in summertime.
It is.
But I was going to ask you guys, it would be really interesting to have it compare. How does it compare with a Margan Tempranillo Graciano? And my bottles of that in the cellar, Halliday says drink in 29, and they're 2016, I think, or 2017. So is this got aging qualities, or should it be drunk in the first few years only?
Tom,
to give a bit of feedback on the wine that you're talking about. So that's Margan from the Hunter. Is that correct, Fred?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So this wine is made. Well, the thought when making this wine is to be drunk very quick. We are now releasing 2020. It's a kind of Beaujolais maybe influence or inspiration. But once again, the Grenache is bringing a very low pH, is lifting the acidity. So all the quality are there to afford a good bottle cellaring. And I've got a quick story. 2 weeks ago, I wanted to have a very simple, fresh, fruity wine at home. Just a couple of glasses, and didn't know what to open. And I found a Magnum of Bozzetto 2016. So I said, okay, let's try it. I'm not sure it's good, but that's a good point, because then I won't drink too much. I opened the Magnum, and the wine was fantastic. So I drank half Magnum or more, because the wine was very, very good. It has lost its very primary fruity character, but that was more on a spicy bouquet style. and I kept the Magnum open for maybe 1 week, 10 days, and the wine was changing, the wine was evolving, but still very interesting and evolving more maybe like an old Chateauneuf or old French Grenache with a lot of complexity, a lot of spice, definitely every day more spices, more Mediterranean herbs. So yes, I think this wine can age very well. I like it better in its primary style, but it has all the figures and all the the structure and components to be able to age and evolve to a more classical Rioja style.
Fantastic. Tom, I'm going to have to cut you off if that's okay, and we're going to launch the second quiz question, but I'm still really interested to get your insights. So whilst people are texting in, I'm sure we can get some more questions directed your way. Jumping back to Barcelona, how many buildings did the famous artist/architect Antoni Gaudí build in Barcelona and its surrounds? But here's the trick, that are now UNESCO listed. Is it 7, 10, or 13? So again, just remember 1, 2, or 3 with your name, email, and obviously the answer there.
Stay off the Google, please, ladies and gents.
Well, I had to furiously Google this, Mark, after we kind of set up the question just to make sure it was correct.
You'll notice I've stayed away from the nerdy wine questions this week after some feedback. So obviously I didn't know this off the top of my head, but trying to get ones that all the wine nerds won't just get straight away,
Yeah, well, if question number 1 was a bit of a shoo-in, I think this one is very, very hard. Unless you're a Gaudí expert, in which case, maybe it's a little bit easier.
I've got a quick question for you, Tom, while we're waiting for this to come in. So with Graciano, am I right in thinking it's a really low yielding grape, which is one of the reasons why it's not used as much, because it just doesn't make as much financial sense? Is that right? Definitely.
That's the point about Graciano. If you try to grow a Graciano like you would grow Tempranillo, it won't ripe. It will be very low alcohol. It will be very green, very bad aromas. So you have to work maybe at half yield of a Tempranillo to get a good Graciano. And as most of the people sell the grapes, they are not interested in low yields because the winery don't correspond to them and won't pay the price for that. So, if you grow Graciano, you have to bottle it. It has to be for you. And then you get very, very special wines. It's one of my favorite grapes also. Graciano with good yield is a perfect grape with very good aging potential, very low pH, and great expression.
Yeah, I agree with you. It kind of reminds me of some of the really old vine Carignan that you get from the south of France sometimes when they're really good. That high acidity and obviously I should imagine older vines probably help as well. But no, it's a great variety. I totally agree. Yeah,
there are a few guys in the Barossa who are doing a bit of work with Graciano at the moment, and it is to keep that acidity going. To be honest, keep the freshness of acidity.
So, actually a funny one with Graciano. I learned about it first when I was working in Margaret River. In the winery I worked at, Xanadu makes a straight Graciano, which is quite rare in Australia. And they usually they let it age for 5 years before releasing. But Ellie mentioned a couple of tasting notes, that balsamic strawberries. They were like Morello cherries, but with that bit of earthy tannin coming through. That's what I remember the most about that wine. But that's my experience with Graciano, one of the very few producers here that do it. So yeah, that was quite cool.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's very few. Tom, you'll know better. I can only think of a couple of straight Gracianos from Rioja. I know Ondare do one. I can't think of this. You don't see it. Oh yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, Contino
is the most famous, maybe.
Yeah. Any other? I mean, I can't think of many others. Any others?
The thing is, there are only 1,000 hectares of Graciano in Rioja out of 60,000, so it's very, very strong. We make the Exopto, which is 70% Graciano. Okay, but that's about it. There's not many 100% Graciano produced.
No.
Very interesting. So we're quickly moving towards past. I think we'll go over, but as long as that's okay with everybody, I'm sure we can make an exception. So thank you so much, Tom. That was very interesting. So I'm going to hand over now to Clara to introduce the Priorat.
Just before we move on, the answer to the question,
of course. Sorry,
was 7. There are 7 UNESCO listed Gaudí buildings in Barcelona and surrounds. So congratulations to all who guessed that.
I'll copy and paste the actual buildings in to the chat box if anyone's interested. So over to you, Clara.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so Priorat. There's always so much to say about this region and this producer that I'm never quite sure where to start, but I might just share a small anecdote with you to start off with, because I think it probably sets the scene in terms of what to expect for the next wine. When I got married, we took our honeymoon in Spain, and we went to Margarit's, and it was about 10 years ago, and we sat down, we were talking to the sommelier, and I said, well, look, we're at Margarit's. I really feel like I should drink something Spanish, but this is a pretty special occasion, and deep down, I really just want to drink Burgundy. And this wine, the incarnation of it 10 years ago, which is slightly different to the one you're going to see today, but this was the wine that they gave us. So I think hopefully that should give everyone straight away a bit of an impression about what to expect. Again, like Mark said, we've tried really hard to present some wines that are not what we have come to kind of think of as very typical Spanish styles in terms of the breadth and depth and the alcohol levels, but wines that offer freshness and elegance and purity as an alternative, ready to demonstrate that Spain's capable of that too. So Priorat, as a region, has an amazing history. It's probably become most famous since about the 80s with René Barbier. Anyone who's heard of René Barbier? He was a French producer who moved into the region and planted a number of French varietals in amongst the native Spanish varietals, started to make wine slightly differently. And with that came this era of very powerful, intense Priorat wines that I guess we know today, and who really kind of, those wine styles really held court in Priorat for many, many years. Dominic Hubert, who is the brainchild behind Terroir Limit, started back in about 2000. And when he first started working in Priorat, he was really following a very similar kind of concept. He wasn't necessarily working with French varietals. He's always worked with the more indigenous varieties. So Carignan, Grenache, Pedro Jimenez for the whites. But again, was using relatively small format oak, picking quite ripe, producing pretty big wines in the first instance. He had a bit of a revelation at some point in the 2000s, drinking through a set of aged Scala Dei wines. Now, Scala Dei is a monastery that dates back to the 12th century. So, and the Scala Dei monastery and the wines produced from Scala Dei were the first wines ever to be planted in that region. And what he really understood when he tasted those wines was that actually these wines had aged unbelievably well, but yet they were made with very little extraction. So by that, like they weren't particularly worked. They were made with no new oak. They were completely whole bunch. There was no destemming then. There was no such thing as a destemmer in the 12th century, obviously. So for him, that was really a revelation. And this is what has informed the next 20 years of his time at Terroir Limit, and certainly informs the wines that we're tasting today and that we see coming from this producer. I think it's really important to mention when talking about terroir limit that everything Dominic has done is really not without controversy. The style of wines he's making now, probably slightly more accepted than they were 5 or 6 years ago. But when we first started importing them, they were really, really pretty much hated by everyone in the region, Dominic and his partners. Their winery was vandalized. They had someone put acid in a tank. And this was all because people felt that what Dominic was doing, even though it had this incredible history behind it, was really not in keeping with how they wanted the region to be presented in the current times. And this isn't a battle that's ended. You know, Dominic often finds that the wines he presents don't get approved by the DO. They'll say it's not ripe enough, it's not rich enough, there's not enough wood, it's not in keeping with the style. So I think that's quite an important part of the story as well. Anyone who's met Dominic, I know Mark will be able to attest, he's a pretty single-minded man. He's not someone to be swayed by a couple of people telling him that they don't like his wine style.
I mean, he is a German, so you can.
Yeah, he is. Yes, he is German.
For anyone who's interested, he's a very ridiculously good-looking German man. So
he's a character, that's for sure. But yeah, so the wines he's producing, you know, that should give you a pretty good insight in terms of the geography. He's based primarily in Torroya, which is a village in the center of Priorat. It's just to the kind of northeast of Gratalops, which is probably one of Priorat's most famous villages. The Licorella soil that Alistair mentioned is obviously a real kind of defining characteristic of the region. Again, so Licorella is a type of soil that's made from decomposed slate, primarily. So it's black and shiny, looks a bit like flat shards. Not like a Chateau Neuf kind of round galette stone, a much kind of sharper, more kind of broken up. Looks like if someone's got a heap of roof tiles and smashed them up, essentially. And it's got this kind of glint of mica in it. And what's really important about that soil is it's really what's driven the styles, because it holds heat, it retains a huge amount of heat, it reflects heat, and it also keeps the heat in the soils. So in terms of the development of the vines and the fruit on the vines, it's pretty intrinsic. What's really interesting about Dominic, again, never one to play to the same tune as everyone else, is he has actually actively gone out looking for sites without Licorella, because his modus operandi of working towards wines of finesse and elegance and purity and freshness, he actually wants sites whereby there's more limestone and more clay, of which there is in Priorat. It's quite kind of, I mean, we tend to make these geographical assumptions and generalizations about the soil types in regions, but Priorat's actually very varied in terms of soils. There's plenty of sand. There's also plenty of clay and limestone when you go looking for it. And that's really what Dominic's hunted down, because it's those more water retentive soils that allow him to produce these wines of slightly lower alcohols and with that kind of real purity and freshness. In terms sorry.
I was just going to say, just pointing out the image you've got in front of you here, and also you would have seen in the map. It's the kind of area that if you're visiting the area and you've got a hire car, you better hope you've got power steering.
And four-wheel drive.
And a four-wheel drive, yes. It's I mean, just to add to your point, I think the elevation is really important for where Dominic picks as well, that because it is quite high where you are going up and down meters.
A lot. So. So the name of the wine, it's a nice little piece of information, the name of the wine, which is just on the screen at the moment. It tells you quite a lot about their vineyard practices, I guess. Terra de Cuques means place of the fireflies. Fireflies are really, really sensitive to chemicals. So basically, if you use chemicals in your vineyards, you won't get fireflies. And the fireflies, there are hundreds of them, thousands of them in the Torroya vineyards. This particular wine, just to tell you a bit about it before we go on too long, is a blend of Grenache and Carignan. It's about a 50-50 blend between the two varieties, so both indigenous varieties to the area and to Spain. It's made from 9 villages, or nine parcels around the village of Torroella. Torroella is the name of the village. This wine actually used to be called Torroella, but it's recently had this name change because they're going to kind of start incorporating a couple of other villages as well. But what's really interesting is that this was a wine that Dominic always set out to make with the young growers of the region. So as well as really wanting to kind of champion this new style, he also really wanted to champion the people who'd been growing fruit well there for generations, and the younger generation coming up, because more and more people were moving away from wanting to be growers. So he has gone out and found, 10, 15 young growers with small parcels, and that's who he gets the fruit from for this particular wine. And he's actually built a winery where they all contribute their fruit, but then also they're all able to use that facility to make bits and bobs of their own things as well. So there's a little bit of a kind of social element as well. So yeah, it's 50-50 blend, and then the winemaking is kind of everything you would expect a Priorat not to be. So it's 100% whole bunch. It is no pigeage, so pigeage and pumping over. So that's when the grapes are pressed to get extraction from the skin. So it's literally just zero extraction. It's like Dominic likes to call it an infusion technique. So more like a tea bag kind of concept than a plunging concept. That's to keep the tannins really fine. And then there is essentially no wood influence because it's in a massive stockinger. Stockinger is a very neutral wood format for anyone who hasn't come across it before. Huge stockinger vessels. So you get a little bit of that kind of oxidative handling that you really benefit from with wood without any toast or oak influence.
Clara, I'm keen to thank you for that. I'm keen to kind of open up the floor and get a couple of our experts' opinion as well as our guests. To me, I'll start with maybe Ali and Tom, and then we can open up the floor. This is the first Priorat that I've ever tasted, and looking at the earth and obviously the blend and the Barbier influence. I mean, is this pretty similar to maybe a Gigondas, for example?
Well, that's a good question. Annoyingly, I've gone through my bag of goodies and lots of my wines have arrived, but this one, there's a note saying it's coming in my next shipment, which will be in the next few days. So annoyingly, this hasn't arrived. I've got the wines for next week though, which is good news. Gigondas, I haven't tasted the terroir limit wines for a few years. Tom might be in a better position to answer this if he's tried them recently, but Gigondas, that's an interesting thing to think about. Is it similar to Gigondas? Maybe not.
I think the only thing I'd say with the Gigondas comparison is I think that kind of southern part of the Rhone is still making wines with quite high ABVs. One of Dominic's main kind of motives is to keep the ABV as low as he can get away with and still get it passed by the DO. So he's actually started making wines in Monsant now as well, which is really interesting. It's the surrounding DO because their legislation allows for much lower alcohol points than Priorat does. But I think whereas Gigondas, in terms of varieties and to a certain extent style, there are probably some comparisons, but I think the alcohol is generally much higher, and as a result you get kind of richer wines that then are more drawn, the winemakers are more drawn towards using oak with them as well. So I think there's probably there's certainly parallels, but I'd say there's significant differences too.
If I was going to put in my 2 cents to this, I would say we'd be looking a little bit further north of the Rhone. I'd be, honestly, this might sound slightly crazy, but I'm with the smoky, really almost granitic, earthy character that I get from this wine. It's more Northern Rhone to me, and I'm not sure if Dominic is meaning to do that in any way, or if he loves his Côte Rôtie or wines of that ilk. But I really genuinely get a lovely. As Ali hinted in the chat before, the wines of Priorat are wines of the earth. They really reflect the soil that they come from, and they really. A lot of people make the connection between, mainly because it's Grenache, between Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Priorat, but that's really quickly changing, and I think this wine here is just absolutely pointing that it is really moving in a different direction. I'd be keen to hear everyone else's thoughts on this, but I mean, for me, it's more Northern Rhone than Southern Rhone, even though there's no Syrah in it at all. So yeah.
Should we open up the floor? Danny, you were obviously treated to some fantastic Barossa wines last night at the Torbrick dinner, one of which obviously being some Grenache. What are your thoughts on this one?
Oh, hello. Sorry, my internet's a bit sketchy at the moment. This is very surprising. This is really good. Yes, I went to the United Cellars Torbrick dinner last night. Amazing. Highly recommended. But yeah, no, I'm very surprised by this. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but this is very drinkable.
Great. And I've noticed that Sally McDough has come onto webcam. Sally, great to see you. What are your thoughts?
What are your thoughts?
I'm here with John, Luke.
Oh, hello, John.
Going to share his thoughts. We're unable to head to some of these COVID open places.
These dinners, because we're still locked up until tomorrow. I think this second wine, this red wines, I think is fantastic, but I think it'll be great in another 5 years as well. I think it's got a little bit of time to go to really, I think, hit its peak. Whereas the first red, I think, probably pretty good now, and over the next 12 months, I think it's a much more shorter time frame for drinking.
Yeah, I massively agree.
We really have gone exactly to your point, John. We've really gone from Grenache to Grenache, haven't we? And we've gone from the youth, and this is really one of the reasons why Grenache is one of my favorite grape varieties. We go from the really youthful, fresh, vibrant, crunchy, bright, drink it slightly chilled Grenache to this kind of earthy, granitic, almost like licorice in mouth kind of richness. So it's just absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that, guys. Ali, any thoughts on this one? Oh, obviously you don't have it. Any thoughts on the region in general?
I haven't got it. But Priorat, I think that's why it's so interesting. Everything that Clara said sort of goes against the traditional thinking of Priorat, which is probably what makes Terroir Limit so exciting, because it is kind of a rebel amongst a sort of pretty small group of producers. But typically for me, Priorat, and I'm sure, as from hearing what you guys were saying, it does have a licorice for me, whether there's that kind of, you think of Licorella soils and licorice, but there's always this licorice kind of character. This minerality is arguably, as I think I put in the chat box, quite possibly the region that best expresses earthiness, minerality, and dare I say it, possibly terroir. I mean, that's a pretty big statement, but they have this minerality behind these wines, which you think of minerality often with white wines. We talk about minerality with, what could be Godello, it could be Grüne Veltliner, whatever it is, and it's normally something that you think of with white wines. But for me, there's a real minerality, whether it's the mica in the soil that Clara was talking about, all these things. But I tend to think of Priorat as it's a big beast. We know Châteauneuf is big, but in a slightly possibly juicier way. A lot of Priorat can be really, really powerful stuff, and it does need time. The Palacios wines and the like, and they do need time to really come come to themselves. So I think it was Sally or someone was saying that, you know, this probably needs another 5 years. And these are age-worthy wines from Priorat, absolutely age-worthy wines. But it's a fascinating region, and it's still young. You know, as Cara was saying, it's really only 1989 when René Barbier kicked off the whole movement. So it's a young region. It's 30 years old. It's an old region, but the reality is it's a young region, you know, in its current form. So I'm always astonished. I've got a very good friend of mine, a master of wine called David Fora, who's just started a winery. He's American, but he moved to Barcelona, and he's making some wines there now, and I'll be tasting his first. He's just in love with the region, absolutely in love with it. It's quite dynamic. There's a whole host of smaller producers now moving in, like David, who are doing some fun stuff. So it's a fascinating thing. And Grenache, you know, what a grape. I think we've got Grenache next week as well. You know, it can be Pinot-esque, as Mark was saying, they're sort of strawberry, like really ethereal, the wines that you get from Gredos around Madrid, you know, that can be beautiful, to sort of Tom's Côte de Rhône type style, just really juicy and crunchy, to the powerful wines. It's a wonderful grape variety. So yeah, that's a few of my thoughts.
Excellent. So before we launch the Wheel of Wine, I'm quite interested to get a kind of quick show of hands as to what everyone's favourite wine was. If you're on webcam, you can put your hands up. If you're not, you can use the chat box. And if you can't be bothered, then absolutely fair enough. But what about the Cava to start off with? Would anyone find that one as their favourite? I'm looking at doesn't look like many people. How about wine number 2, the Rioja? Obviously, I think Tom's put his hand up.
I'm going to say yes.
And then finally, wine number 3. Oh, it looks like it's quite an even split between 2 and 3 there. I don't know if I could.
I think the entire Kumar clan have been talked into that Priorat at the end there. I think Stephen might have something to do with that. I know he likes these styles.
Well, that's a good place, actually. Steve, would you care to give us your thoughts on that one just before we move on?
I'd love to. I really I love that wine, and for me, I loved hearing the story about it, and I loved hearing, I love the story about Mugaritz to start it off, because I know the restaurant pretty well in San Sebastian. I love it, but I really do find this wine an extraordinarily unusual wine, and I think it's probably because of the Carignan. I mean, I think it's the Carignan that kind of gives it an unusual sense. I love the smokiness to it. I love that licorice that Mark picked up on. So I think there's a lot going for it. I mean, it's a lovely, medium to full-bodied style. Very, very different to the Rioja. But 2 excellent examples of wonderful Spanish wine. Thank you.
Kudos to the buying team, I reckon. Okay, well, Clara, thank you for that. Really appreciate it. I know that we're running a little bit on and people need to move on. So we are going to launch the Wheel of Wine. So well done to everybody who texted in. Jane has set up the list for me, and there's a lot of names. So I'm just going to share my screen. As you can see there, a really healthy Wheel of Wine this evening. So well done. Well done to everybody who got both correct. I'm going to give it a spin, and good luck.
That is a busy wheel right there.
It is, isn't it? I think I'm just going to say something. I think we've seen while it's spinning, we've seen Spain is so exciting. Who's won?
Paul River. Very good.
Paul. Congratulations. Do we have Paul on the gallery view? I can't see. He's.
Here we go. Hey. Congrats, guys.
Well done, Paul. Congrats. We'll be in touch with the voucher.
Thumbs up.
Well done.
Excellent.
Yes, as I was just saying, I think Spain is so exciting, and we looked at Cava from Catalonia, and then we've gone to Priorat. But some of the white wines from those regions as well, from Terra Alta. There's so many old vine, interesting white grape varieties as well. Spain is so exciting. I want to see more of it in Australia.
So as you can see, we've got the 3 wines up there. If you're interested in revisiting any of these, feel free to get in touch. We'll send a text message out tomorrow morning, as we did last week, and you can just get back with your name, wine, and the quantity you'd like to have a look at. Yeah, I think for the Rioja for me, what an absolute bargain at $29.99.
I was just about to say, Tom, please look away from that price, because that is borderline criminal. That's unbelievable. I know I'm the one who makes the prices, but that's criminal. But Tom, thank you very much, mate. That was so good to have you along.
Thank you,
really value your insights, and it was really great to see you again, mate.
Thanks a lot. That was a great chat. I really enjoyed being there with you. So whenever you'd like, I'm available for any other tastings. Thank you.
Oh, we'd love to. And I'm not sure if Clara has got any of your other wines in, but I'm sure we can circulate an email around for those who have, loved that style and are keen to explore your wines in a little bit more detail as well. So thank you so much. Just moving forward before we let everybody go and wish everybody a nice evening. We do have a couple more online tastings coming up after the tour. Obviously, we've still got 2 weeks left, but if you're interested in either northern or southern Italian wines, we've got them on the 15th and the 29th respectively. And then more of Spain, if you're interested in having a look at some of the white wines that Spain produces on the 5th. We'll be looking at those.
I thought I'd just put in here, just so you guys know, you won't be repeating any wines at all. So we're going to be doing an Albarino, a Verdejo, and a Chacoli. If anyone's never tried a Chacoli before, it is definitely worth your time. So just thought I'd put that in there.
Believe it or not, this falls at International Albarino Day.
What a shock.
Hence the theme.
Fantastic. And for those, well, hopefully for everybody who is out of lockdown, we've got lots of in-person events upcoming. So the Grand Cru Chardonnay, we're running in Perth, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. We'd love to come see you and say hi. So that is on the 9th going all the way to the 30th, and obviously different dates depending on each city. Tour de Riesling is happening on the 21st in Sydney. And then finally, one of the big ones for the year, we've got the Grand Cru Champagne events happening between the 4th and the 25th. So just have a quick look on our website if you're interested in booking into any of those.
It's incredible. We have to think about champagne going into Christmas, but we definitely do. We're already halfway through June, so yeah, we've got to get into it.
And the thing is, you've obviously got to try your champagnes before you get into the bulk of them coming into December and the festive period. So yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you all to all the guests, Clara, Tom, obviously Ali, and the team at UC. It's been great having you guys along again, and really looking forward to seeing you for week 3.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Enjoy the rest of you all.
Cheers. Thanks,
Great
Tom.
to see you, Tom. Thanks, Ali.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye.